Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third BEREC public debriefing of the year. Today we will present the outcomes of our 60th ordinary plenary meetings held in Budapest last week. And today with us is our new director of BEREC office, Mrs. Verena Weber, and I pass the floor to her to briefly introduce herself. Verena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tonko, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you here, which is my first, part of the public debriefing. So my name is Verena Weber. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working at the OECD previously, where I was in charge of telecom policy and regulation, as well as semiconductor policy. Started in the office on the 1st of July, during what I think is a very exciting time that we have ahead of us in the coming years. So on the one side, we see very interesting technological telecom developments happening around the world. Some in Europe, some outside Europe, more of an integration between terrestrial and non-terrestrial networks. On the other hand, we see that there is a lot of movement when it comes to telecom policy, like with a new commission, with the review of the code. Together with the entire team of the BEREC office, we're more than happy to support BEREC in this endeavor, as well as the European institutions. With this, back to Tonko.
Thank you very much, Verena. So before we proceed with the presentation, I would like to give you a short explanation on the format of the public debriefing and how you can interact. Of course, for you who are here, you will raise your hands during Q&A sessions, and you will be given the floor to ask your questions. We have also received, one question sent by email before the event. We will answer it during the Q&A. And also we receive questions via live chat box, which is available. And the questions related to the topics presenting during the first part of the public debriefing will be answered immediately, and the rest of the questions we will save for the end of public debriefing. May I have the next slide, please? So during first part, my colleague Robert Mourik, incoming BEREC Chair, will present draft work program for 2025. And our wireless network evolution co-chairs Joe Lynch here and Sietse van der Gast, who is online, will present draft report on the evolution of private and public 5G networks in Europe, followed by the first Q&A session. And the second part will start with the presentation of the implementation report on the BEREC Guidelines on Geographical Surveys of Network Deployments by our Remedies and Market Monitoring Workgroup co-chairs Annegret Grebel and Marco Benacchio. And after that, I will inform you on the latest BEREC updates, including the results of the elections of BEREC Chair 2026 and the members of Mini-Board 2025, also about other documents which were adopted at the plenary meeting. So just before the end of before the second Q&A session, Verena will present new BEREC website and content. So I will now pass the floor to Robert. Robert, please take the floor and present Work Program 2025.
Good afternoon, everyone, and lovely to see you through this wood of cameras here. I hope you can still make me out. At the last plenary meeting, the incoming chair, me, presented the draft work program for 2025, and we got the approval of the Board of Regulators to go into public consultation on that draft working program. So if you go to the BEREC website, you can probably already find that draft work program that went live last Friday. Now, the coming up with a work program is actually more difficult than you think, because we base ourselves on a public consultation and a request for topics, both for my members and from other stakeholders. And frankly, we could have had a work program that is 3 times as long as what it currently is, but there is a limited capacity in BEREC to deal with projects. So we had to make choices. And just to explain a little bit further, there are kind of two types of projects. We have mandatory projects, which are the ones that we are legally obliged to do. The Commission comes with a proposal on something and we need to, and by law, we have to give our opinion. That is something that is a project in BEREC that we have to do. There are also projects that were started the year before and we need to finish it. We cannot just stop it. So we had, when we started to think about the work program, we had 28 of those projects, and that eventually grew to 32 mandatory projects. And given the fact that the total capacity within BEREC is, let's say, roughly about 50, there was a limited space for new projects. But the structure of the work program for 2025 is roughly the same as that of 2024. The projects kind of have to answer to all the strategic objectives that we have in BEREC. So you see that there are a group of projects that speak to promoting full connectivity. That is our first strategic objective. We have also projects that talk to the promoting sustainable and open digital markets, and then we have a number of end user related projects, and then we have a group of projects that stem from other tasks. So as I said, we ended up with a proposed 50 projects, and we can go to the next slide. And here you can see, you can read the proposal yourself if you go to the website, of course, but just to give you an idea how those projects then are subdivided by strategic objectives. The first one, you see things like update of the BEREC guidelines to on VHCN, 2 guidelines on the GIA, workshop on the competitive effects of strategic fiber network deployment, etc. There are a number of projects that speak to priority 2, thriving sustainable and open digital markets, and then we're looking at the Digital Markets Act and the contributions that BEREC makes to the AI subgroup, for example, an external workshop on implementing on the implementation of equivalence of inputs, and then contributing to the future code of conduct on ECN and ECS sustainability. There are 7 projects under the strategic priority 3. We're going to look at universal service. We're going to look at switching and termination of contracts. And we are also under the NEVERS initiative looking at guidelines on preventing smishing. And then under that heading of other tasks, there are 13 other task projects, and one of them includes an opinion about the functioning of the roaming regulation and a midterm strategy review. We can go to the next slide, please. What is important to understand is that I say 50 projects, but what is important in order to manage that is what type of projects they are. You can understand that if BEREC has to write a report and needs to do a public consultation on that, or that is quite a heavy workload for a working group, whereas a workshop could potentially be a lot lighter. So we looked at the workload for each of the working groups and made sure that there is a good mix of reports, workshops, etc., in order to manage the actual workload of each working group. You see one category here that is called TBD, There are in the work program a number of placeholder projects where we have kind of given the title what we want to do or what topic we think we need to address, but we don't quite know at this moment what the output will be, but we need to kind of reserve time. We can go to the next slide, please. I think it's probably of importance to you to know how the public consultations are divided across the year, because you wouldn't like us to come with 15 public consultations in January, but we try to spread the load a little bit across the year. So we have a total of 10 public consultations in 2025 that we can foresee. And then for the first plenary, we have an update of criterion 3 of the BEREC guidelines on very high capacity networks and an update of the BEREC intra-communication guidelines. In P3, we have 3 public consultation guidelines on the access to in-building physical infrastructure, guidelines on the coordination of civil works. They are both GIA related. And then the review of our midterm strategy. On P3, we are looking at the work program, of course, for the next year. That is one consultation. And we're looking at those guidelines for smishing that I mentioned earlier. And then finally in P4, we will look at a report on switching and termination of contracts and a fact-finding report on the competition indicators and regulatory highlights in different jurisdictions. So I hope that we balance it out across the year to make your life a little bit easier as well. We can go to the next slide. This is less of importance to you, but for us, it is important that the same applies, that workloads balance across the different plenary meetings. And you can see here in the last column that we don't have a first plenary without any decision points, and at the last plenary with loads. It is still a bit more towards the backhand, but it is manageable, we think, from between the different plenaries. So you will see that we have 39 documents there that need to be looked at, and we think this is reasonable from a workload point of view. So we go to the next slide with a bit of a summary. It's a heavy workload. 50 projects is comparable basically to the other years, but there is one big difference, and that is what you don't see is covered in this 50 projects, and that is that we kept one working group completely free to deal with any questions that will arise from the Commission and the development of new legislation. So basically there is one project there that says deal with the new framework, and that could be a big task for us next year. So not only is this a heavy workload, we will foresee that that working group in particular, but also the Board of Regulators and BEREC across the various working groups is going to be extremely busy. There are a significant number of mandatory projects, and that was growing as we were developing the work program, and that had an impact on how much voluntary and new work we could do. As I said, we had enough suggestions and very good suggestions, and I want to thank everyone to have a work program of 130 projects, but that was just not possible. So we will see now how this is going. We were looking forward to your comments. We can go to the next slides, which hopefully we will achieve, receive on the 4th of November or before. On the 14th, we are going to discuss your feedback at CN level, at the contact network level, and then hopefully on the 5th of December, we can adopt this working program in our last plenary of the year in Ljubljana. And that's kind of everything I had to say. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to you, Joe.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. So I will very briefly describe the output that we produced last week, which is set out in a document BOR 24-150, which is the BEREC draft report on the evolution of private and public 5G networks in Europe. I'll say I'll be brief because the report is actually quite readable and it's quite short, and you'll be able to extract the high-level messages readily enough. Dietze van der Gast is the co-chair, and he's the Market and Competition Authority of the Netherlands, and he's online in case there's any online questions that need to be answered. So next slide, please. And first click, please. So essentially, what is a 5G private network? There are many types of private networks. There's Wi-Fi networks, which can be private. We have Wi-Fi 7, which allows for roaming on networks. We have Zigbee networks. We have satellite private networks. You can distinguish a private network by the type of use case that's on the private network and what organizations use the network. Our report focuses on the 3GPP-based architecture, essentially 3GPP 5G mobile networks. Non-public, isolated private networks that use no mobile network operator resources in the form of a private network, but they're also integrated private networks which do use the resources of a mobile network operator. Next click, please. So essentially, this is a fact-finding report for BEREC. It is for consultation, and it only sets out one side of the picture because it's based on an NRA survey, a survey to the national regulatory authorities. In that regard, there were 31 responses over 2 parts of that survey. Our internal inquiry reveals that there are a variety of assignment methods, fees, and durations of private networks. The most popular frequency range is the 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz, which is also subject to CPT technical compatibility analysis, and possibly by an EC mandate, this will become more harmonized through the Radio Spectrum Committee in the future. The 26 gigahertz band is available for private network use, but again, not very well used. And there are also private networks which are run on a lease from an MNO to an operator. There are many different ways that NRAs characterize and define private networks. There's different classifications and registrations used by NRAs, so it's very likely that a significant part of the private network deployments is just not known to NRAs, which means we're not sure what the challenges to private networks are and whether or not there are challenges which regulators can assist in addressing. If you go to the next click, please. Numbering issues. By that I really mean identifiers of private networks. If there are a large number of private networks that might work in a confined geographical area, there might be interferences between the private networks. And numbering is a way to identify the types of network to prevent such interferences. We have evidence or anecdotal evidence that actually operating systems can determine what kinds of combinations of numbers can be used by private networks, and we have that in the report. Next click, please. So drivers and use cases. BEREC does not want to write a report about the drivers and use cases, but we do see a need to understand the drivers and use cases as best we can. We hear stories that private networks offer more control or more security, and that's useful in particular contexts, but it would be helpful for us to have some more information. In Spain, we're aware of private networks in the seaports, in Barcelona and Valencia. In Sweden, we have examples of private networks in the forestry industry. In Norway, there's private networks in the mining industry. In Greece, it's transport, although albeit it's not a 5G private network. In Ireland, we have the Test and Trial Ireland scheme, www.testandtrialireland.ie, which facilitates tests and trials. And Tonko and Domagoj, in Croatia, there's now a regime in place for private networks, and you're ready for applications. In Germany, there are over 400 licenses for private networks in that most popular frequency range I mentioned. There is a flourishing network of small and medium enterprises in the private network business, from providers who provide 5G core in a box to other providers who integrate private networks in the areas I mentioned, in ports and seaports and airports. We're aware that the 5G Observatory from the Commission has information about private networks. There are also other studies which have information about private networks. So we would welcome some more information about the drivers and use cases, and we may publish those alongside our final report, but our report will not be about those in particular. Next click, please. Of course, cloudification and Open RAN may propel private network deployment. And we're aware of the case studies, some which we've looked at in the States, involving Amazon Web Services and neutral hosting, with carriers, for multiple carriers on indoor scenarios. And neutral hosting is something that is of interest to us, and we would welcome understanding more examples around that. And also referring to Robert's presentation a little bit, we are trying to underscore our approach to multi-annual work program. So unfortunately, this year, in 2025, we're going to have to postpone a call for inputs on open interfaces to mobile networks, which may have also supplemented information on this project. We may come back to it in 2026. We also may come back to the topic of Open RAN again itself in 2026 to monitor developments and see how this all fits into the picture of private networks and other developments in the sector. And final click there. Okay, it's open for consultation on the 29th of November. And final click again, please. So very briefly, and I won't talk to this, we do talk about the technical architectures in the report. First click, please. And we talk about the standalone isolated deployments. And then there are 3 flavors of integrated deployments, which we talk about in the paper. So if you do 3 clicks there, and that just shows the differences in those deployments. And they're described a little bit in our report, and it's based on information from the 5G ACEA. And then next slide, please. Yeah. So essentially, to summarize, most countries do have a framework in place for private networks. There are some differences. There are some differences even between the way NRAs just talk about private networks. Some are specific and call it whether it's plot-based or a geographical area-based type deployment. And there are different conditions with regard to interworking with public networks. And then the final slide then, I'll pass back to Tonko. So basically, this is out for consultation now. Please have your say. We will write a final report for plenary 1. There are a list of many consultation questions in the report. We would like information around transnational private networks, if there are any examples, or distributed private networks across the Union. And interworking with public networks is another topic of interest for us. So that's all from our side, and I hope that you find the report as readable, that you can give us good comments and feedback for plenary 1. Thank you. Tonko, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thanks to Robert. So we now open our first Q&A session. And before I pass the floor to you, Luke, I have just one question which was sent before the meeting with the registration form, which is actually not addressing any topic from today's meeting and was asked by Mr. Lanfranco Maini from Windtre SPA. Are there any news about the EU Commission public consultation on international calls and text messages, SMS, within the EU, fair use and anti-fraud policy? Of course, this would be a question for the European Commission, but we checked anyway, and they are still working on it, and there will be a have your say exercise probably later this year. And with that, Luke, the floor is yours to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Joe, I think the way you presented the report makes us that we really want to read it. So thank you for that. On this report, I think that understanding the driver for this private network is something important. And I think what might be important as well is in which way the bashing of the European telecom that has been done by some institutions and some stakeholders over the last 5 years, how has this impacted the will of some companies to choose for a private network creator to collaborate with a telecom operator? You see, that's something important. As I always say, in the last 2000, I worked for Telenet. In 2001, Telenet was almost bankrupt following the newspaper. And during that year, Telenet was not able to sign any contract with any businesses. Because, of course, if you are a business and you want to do a long-term deal with a company and you hear that this company is in financial distress, you don't do it. So I think understanding this is, in my view, something important. Then my second point, and is a question to one of the topics that you mentioned, Tonko, and thank you for that. And that is, of course, from our perspective and for the sector as a whole, I would say, is probably one of the most fundamental points that will come out, not only because of the substance that it represents, but also because of the process. And the one that I mentioned, that I refer to, is the review of the relevant markets recommendation. Okay. And obviously, as it is foreseen in the code, that BEREC will have to do an opinion, and we also understand and we respect that on an opinion on a proposal from the Commission, that BEREC does not make a public consultation. So on that, we have absolutely no issue to understand. And my question is, if we look now to the past experience, and certainly the gigabit connectivity recommendation, where everybody knows our big concern and our big critiques we have given, one on the process, and the second thing on simply the fact that the Commission totally ignored the strong BEREC opinion on the interpretation of Article 74, or will BEREC assure that this time the Commission will not simply ignore the BEREC opinion? That's my first question. The second point, as I said, I understand that there will be not be a public consultation, but would it not be good, and in which way could BEREC engage with the stakeholder upfront before all this comes out, and to have a kind of parallel track where we can organize substantive debates? And you know that my opinion is that the Brussels bubble suffers a little bit from the TikTok syndrome, when my youngest son says if a video is longer than 30 seconds, I don't listen to it, but I think it's time to have really serious substantive debates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joe, would you like to do any comments on the first part? It was not really a question, it was more a comment. Okay, for the second part, well, any one of us can comment to that, I guess. We cannot ensure that the Commission takes into account what we say. I mean, there's no procedure how to do that. We can publish what we think, and that is our opinion, and we would like it to be considered very seriously. So we shall see what happens, but no guarantees. And we can, of course, work with the stakeholders, but you know, for the BEREC opinions, it's true. We never did the public consultation. It's internal BEREC opinion. It's the opinion of the independent regulator. So it's not really, for me at least, it's not logical to ask for an additional opinion from anyone else, either stakeholders or governments or any other institutions. That should be kept within BEREC. But of course, we can interact all the time. And today's presentation actually ends with the slide, let's stay in touch. So I think that's what I can say. I don't know, Robert, it's next year is your year. Maybe you would like to comment on that.
Well, two small sentences. This is not as if the members of BEREC are not well versed in relevant markets. We are, and we know the markets quite well. And I think all the members of BEREC are keen to see that markets function well and are competitive and innovative, and they will answer that question that the Commission asks from us in that spirit. I think at a national level there will be a lot of talk with different operators, but I think you shouldn't be afraid that BEREC doesn't take an independent and fact-based view on that question.
Thank you, Robert. Any other question in the room? Yes. Please, can you just say your name and the organization?
Liliana Borisova, VATM, Germany. Yes, I have a question related to the work program, because you introduced a couple of different items. So my first question is related to the update of the guidelines on the very high capacity networks and the workshops on competitive effects on strategic fiber networks deployment. Are those going to explore the effects and the development of copper switch off? And how are the frictions in the subject of those two are going to be aligned with each other? And the next question relates to the contribution of BEREC to future code of conduct on ECN and TSS sustainability. How is this going to happen? What sort of work do you envision doing? And how you are going to align it with the Commission, with the national regulatory authorities, and so on. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. It shows you read our work program in detail. That's good. Well, I'm not going to help you very much because most of those projects are on the list exactly to find out some of those things that you are mentioning. Yes, of course, we will have in the back of our minds copper switch off. I think as BEREC, we had a very good discussion in the last plenary about the benefits and problems related to copper switch off, but also how copper switch off can be a driver for attaining the 2030 goals. Your second question was with regard to sustainability. I think we're on the record of saying that sustainability is more and more becoming a core issue for BEREC and for its members in different ways. Telecoms and communication is both part of the problem and part of the solution. And we are trying to see how we can make networks more energy efficient so that they are less part of the problem, but also how they can contribute to the solution. But the main thing that we are going to look at is how we can integrate sustainability in all the decisions we take and how we can make sure that sustainability is at the heart of what we do. But exactly what we need to do and what form that takes is what those projects are partially about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Any other question in the room? If not, we have two questions in the chat. So first one, Joe, please listen to this. There is a clear trend towards hybrid private networks that integrate 5G and Wi-Fi seamlessly, taking advantage of the complementarity of 5G for wider area coverage and mobility, and Wi-Fi 6, 6E, 7 for high-speed, low-latency, low-cost indoor coverage. Why would BEREC limit itself to only considering pure 3GPP-based networks? That's from Detlef Führer.
Second question.
I can read the second question as well. It's from Marceau Brigand, Eutelsat Group. How can interested parties get involved in the workshop on environmental footprint of satellite constellations?
You first.
Don't take the first one. So, well, I'll take the second one first, and we can, because I'm trying to wrap my head around, as you can hear it think here, clink, clink, clink. So the workshop on environmental footprint of satellites, if it stays in the draft work program, it's out for consultation. All those details will be made available in the normal way. So you need not worry, Eutelsat. I'm sure there will be save the dates and all the usual. Now, in relation to why we're looking at 5G private networks, 5G private networks are interesting from a number of perspectives, not least of which are understanding the deployment of 5G and 5G standalone, and it is linked. You'd have to understand that if there's 5G private networks which are based on integrated solutions, they will probably involve 5G standalone, and we have digital decade targets. So in our draft report, I don't have it right to hand, but we have a small section which just describes our motivation, and there are a number of reasons why 5G private networks are interesting, and that's one of them. So we get an understanding of deployment of 5G standalone. But there's also a how do we say it? I call it a flourishing SME base around private 5G networks, which we don't really get so much interaction with as a regulator. So that's why we're trying to understand. So one of the things we want to do is to promote this consultation so that we can garner those views. Now, we're not saying that there aren't other type of private networks. There are, and they all fit a particular purpose. But we would be most interested in those ones that interact and internetwork with the public network. I can come back to you again, Detlef, on that. We can have an exchange. But if there's something you'd like to add, I know the other co-chair, Sietse van der Gast, is here. Otherwise, happy to follow up on email, Detlef.
Sietse, would you like to add something?
Only little to add. Well, we start from 5G based networks, but of course, as context, Wi-Fi is also important. But because the interaction numbering issues, interaction or interconnectivity with the public networks, we chose this focus because otherwise it gets also very broad. But especially in the in the consultation, we hope to get broader information. So if there are relevant issues to mention there, then of course we would like to know. But the primary focus is 5G based networks, or 3GPP based networks with a focus on 5G.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions here? No, I see none in chat as well. So we can now move to the second part of this public debriefing. And I would like to pass the floor to Annegret and Marco to present implementation report on the BEREC Guidelines on Geographical Surveys of Network Deployments. Annegret and Marco, the floor is now yours.
Yes, thank you. Marco will start.
Yeah.
Yeah, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm Marco Benacchio from the Italian regulator, HAKOM, currently co-chairing together with Annegret Gröbel, the BEREC group on remedies and market monitoring. And one of the tasks of this group was to work on a report concerning the implementation of the BEREC guidelines on the geographical survey of network deployments filed under BOR 24 number 146. Next slide, please. Okay, so a bit of a background. Article 22 of the code established that member states through NRAs or other competent authorities should conduct a geographical survey of the reach of the electronic communication networks capable of delivering broadband. And the geographical surveys should be sufficiently granular and include the quality of service information. And it may also include forecasts on the reach of very high capacity network. And the goal was to facilitate design, implementation and monitoring of broadband policies and also related regulation. The same article tasked BEREC with the delivery of guidelines to assist authorities to implement their obligation. And BEREC approved and published 3 different guidelines that were published as an handbook in June 2021. And one of the paragraph 15 of the core network established that the BEREC would prepare an implementation report to examine how different European countries had transposed and enabled Article 22 provisions. And after this report, BEREC would consider whether to revise and update the guidelines. So the report recently approved in plenary 3 in Budapest has the function to enable BEREC to judge the usefulness of its guidelines, to conduct the geographical studies and to implement consistently the Article 22 provisions, identify any positive lessons learned and detect any areas for improvement. And finally, to consider let's say, program or not an update of the guidelines in the next year, the guidelines on Article 22. Next slide, please. Very brief set of information on the process and the number of NRAs involved. We gathered the information from 27 public authorities that are responsible for conducting the geographical studies, and the situation is that in 18 member states out of 27, the responsibility is on the national regulator. In 4 other cases, the responsibility is on other competent authority, and we have 5 member states in which there is a joint responsibility of NRA and another authority. And according to the information retrieved, 27, so the 100% of the respondents, member states implement the geographical survey for the fixed broadband and 26 for mobile broadband. And just in terms of comparison, where we were dealing with the guidelines in 2019 and 20, there were 21 member states with 1 broadband maps in the fixed for the fixed broadband, and 17 with broad maps on mobile broadband. So this is the first indication of an increase of the implementation of such an activity. In terms of frequencies, all member states update the geographical studies at least once a year. And just to give you let's say a sketch representation of the report, which is basically a descriptive report, the index and the structure is following the one of the Article 22 broadband mapping guidelines. If you see next slide, please, you will see the framework. So we start from examine, let's say, definitions, the application of definition for fixed broadband, mobile broadband. Then we we describe the differentiations in VHCN classes, how to deal with forecasts, how member states are publishing and sharing data, apart from the one they are collecting, and technical aspects for verification of the data, and the links with other policy intervention in terms of state aid. And it's all from my side, and I pass the floor to my colleague Annegret.
Yes, thank you. And now I'm presenting briefly some of the main findings. So what we see is that indeed the Article 22 and the BEREC guidelines, which need to be seen together, have resulted in a very substantial increase in the number of member states carrying out the geographical survey, and also in the granularity of the information included. And also most of the NRAs or the competent authorities use now a geographical information system. And we also have asked NRAs and the OCAs whether they think that they have that they are sufficiently empowered to collect the data. And 24 authorities of the 27 mentioned that they think that with Article 22 and the guidelines, they are sufficiently empowered to collect the data sets and in order to evaluate the geographical coverage and the performance of networks properly. We also saw that there is a harmonization effect, and that the BEREC guidelines have contributed to harmonization of the criteria to map broadband coverage among member states, which then results in a better comparability of national situations, because we have the common definitions, the processes, and also a common underlying understanding. However, as you can see in the next slide, there are also some things which can be improved. So a number of member states have experienced some problems in collecting quality of service information at a sufficiently granular level, and in particular for expected peak time speed. Yeah, so that is a very challenging indicator to collect and to present and to compare. So here we see room for improvement. And in that sense, more could be done to assist authorities regarding the quality of service indicators in general, and more in particular also for fixed wireless access. Then there is another critical issue which now relates more to the information or regarding and characterizing mobile networks. That is particularly the case for the coverage of 5G networks and the harmonized presentation of this. So what we discovered in this area is that the approaches adopted by NRAs and other competent authorities could be different, and the collections are mostly based on a distinction between the 5G standalone and 5G non-standalone, and consequently then the presentations might result in different pictures depending on where you draw the line and how you collect this. So all in all, we saw that there is progress made because of the guidelines, but we also saw that there is room for improvement regarding the approaches on how NRAs and OCAs implement the guidelines. In particular, in order to achieve further harmonization and thus then an increase in the comparability across member states. So what you see in the next slide is now what are our conclusions. So all in all, BEREC considers it appropriate to propose an update of the BEREC guidelines on broadband mapping, as we call them. That is due to the fact, first of all, that there are technological developments, as we just heard there. Then there are more recent BEREC documents. You saw that the Article 22 guidelines are one of the earliest one. Meanwhile, we have the VHCN guidelines and even the updated, partly updated VHCN guidelines. And of course, they also need to be consistent. Furthermore, there's new EU legislation, in particular the GIA, the Gigabit Infrastructure Act, which also deals with these issues of coverage and of mapping. And finally, as you are all aware, there is also a multitude of more recent EU and EC soft law documents, among other things like the Annex 1 in the EU state aid guidelines, but also documents related to the mapping and measurement of the digital decade key performance indicators, which were not there when we originally drafted the guidelines and adopted the guidelines. So all these mixtures, so factual developments as well as legal developments, etc., led us to the conclusion that an update is required, and we will work on the update, of course, in close cooperation with the Commission. And as you probably know, the Commission is also looking at, in particular, quality of service indicators. Developing a methodology on 5G mobile and fixed quality of service coverage mapping. This goes hand in hand, and so because there's a lot of overlap, and so we need to work there in close cooperation in order to have documents consistent. And not overburden or overload operators with the data collection several times and also with calculating several times. So therefore, this item, the update of the guidelines, is included in the work program 2025, and I think Robert also mentioned it. You will see on the last slide from our working group that the implementation report was approved and for publication, and that the report will be published or is published already on the BEREC website, so you can go into more details there. And as I said, we foresee an update of the Article 22 broadband mapping guidelines in close cooperation with the Commission, working on this methodology for the quality of service parameters. And this relates, and the timing depends, and the timeline depends a little bit on working together there, and also on the timeline for the methodology. So we need to get this consistent. So it's not yet exactly fixed. The only fact that is sure is that we have to work on this in 2025. That's it from our side, and happy to take any questions. Back to you, Tonko.
Thank you, Annegret. Thank you, Marco. Prepare for the Q&A session, and in the meantime, I will update you on some recent activities of BEREC, starting with the results of elections for the BEREC Chair 2026 and the Mini Board 2025. So elected BEREC Chair for 2026 is Mr. Marko Mišmaš from AKOS, Slovenia. You can see him with the red tie on the picture in the upper corner in the middle. And the BEREC Vice Chairs for 2025 are Mrs. Alejandra de Iturriaga Gandini, Director of Telecommunications and Audiovisual Sector at CNMC Spain, and Mrs. Daniela Brenstrup, Vice President of BNetzA Germany. And also representative of participants without voting rights will be Mrs. Lilia Malone, Commissioner at NCC Ukraine, and this is the first time that Ukraine participates in the mini board of BEREC, and they will serve in the mini board 2025 together with Robert as an acting chair and with me as an outgoing chair. It's always so complicated with this incoming, outgoing. I must be very careful not to do a mistake. Next slide, please. So in addition to the reports that we presented today, we published also some other documents. And I would particularly like to mention two very interesting reports. So it's a report on cloud services and edge computing, and report on the entry of large content application providers into the markets for electronic communications network and services. And each of these is accompanied by the report on the outcome of the respective public consultation. And we thank you very much for participating in these public consultations. Please check our website for the rest of the documents. I will not read all the documents that were published. Next slide, please. So on the upcoming public events, we will have our workshop on security opportunities and challenges for network resilience on 19th of November. I think it's confirmed. Then we will have fourth public debriefing this year on 11th of December, but it will be online event. And well, this is not April Fool's. This will really happen on the 1st of April next year. We will have 13th BEREC Stakeholder Forum in Brussels, and the information on that will be given later. Next slide, please. We mentioned both things that are open, both documents open for the public consultation. So one is draft BEREC work program. It's open till 4th of November, and draft report on the evolution of private and public 5G networks in Europe till 29th of November. So you will have enough time, and this is actually short, as Joe already said. Next slide, please. And with next slide, I give the floor back to Verena to present the launch of our new website.
Thank you, Tonko. And if we jump right to the next slide. So I'm quite excited to announce that on the 22nd of July, we launched the new BEREC website. So as you know, this is our central hub of information. So it received a fresh look, a new look, and a couple of improvements. And I would in particular thank our communications team. You have Vera and Ilse in the back of the room for those of you who are here. And I would also like to thank Lauma, who's connected online. And as like a very special thanks goes to Yannick, who is really behind basically revamping our website. So I would like to take this opportunity to present you some of the improvements that we did, some of the contents that we added on the next slides. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So let me start with our general menu. So what we did is we restructured the main menu and merged key sections for simplicity. So what you will be able to do is you can hover over our main menu sections and you'll get the overview, of all the subsections below. We also added a sidebar, which you can see in the video that we're playing, and multiple shortcuts on the landing page and on other pages in order to provide you really quick and easy access points to the rich information that we have on the website. So overall, our goal was to enhance your experience, to make the experience smoother and more intuitive, and really, please roam on our website to check it out. With this, we can move to the next slide. So Tonko mentioned that we added significant content to the site, so we're very happy about that. So some of you might know we had content on open internet so far on the old website. Now with the new website, we have sections on roaming, on digital markets, and on sustainability. And we further plan to expand more context sections. We also improved the core functionality of the BEREC website, and we hope this will make it easier for you, which is the document search. So if you go to the document search, what you find now is you find the 6 buttons for particular categories that serve as the main filters. And we will also show you what you can see on the short video as we show you the most recent documents, right? So if you read something in the news, go to the website. In the boxes, you find our most recent documents. We are going to add a tagging functionality. So for all the new material that is being uploaded, it will be tagged. So this will make it easier for you to find the information and related documents. If we go to the last slide, so last but certainly not least, also because we are actually streaming this event. So from now on, you can find all of our main streamings on the landing page, right? So if you can't make it to this room, and thanks for those of you who joined virtually, just go to the website, one click, you'll be able to join. And we also have now a central library where you can find all of our recorded videos sorted by category and year. With additional filtering options, so it's more convenient for you to find what you're looking for. You can also find our official BEREC and BEREC Office logo files there, well, together, obviously, with our guidelines on their usage. And in the future, we're also delighted to present you more image galleries from our dedicated BEREC event. And finally, if you want us to improve the website further, this is like a living central hub for us, so please do let us know. And with this, thank you very much, and I'm handing it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Verena. So visit the website and check the news. And with that, we have come to the second Q&A session. I see no questions in the chat, so would anyone like to take the floor in the room? Yes, please.
Hi, Tony Shorthold from Tallaght. So I had a quick question for Annegret. I look forward to reading the report. It's just, does the report deal with the extent to which the Article 22 surveys are being used? To what extent are areas been designated, or is that being fed into public authorities, or are operators or public authorities been invited? So it's just, to what extent is all this work on Article 22 being used, I suppose? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Annegret, you can respond immediately.
Well, we have gone through exactly the structure of the guidelines, but more from the side of the one that has to collect the data and then show it and present it. But of course, so that means we have no concrete names of, let's say, designated areas or not. But what we have is at the end, we have a list with all the relevant websites of the different NRAs and or OCAs, where you can find the maps, and then you can look at the maps and see whether there is a designated area somewhere or not. So this is only, let's say it's indirectly shown, but not in the report as such. Yeah. So if you were to ask me, can you say how many designated areas there are or not? I wouldn't be able to answer it, because we haven't done this, let's say, aggregation in that sense of all the areas. So I also cannot say how much this is actually then used to have this process according to Article 22 when there is not enough coverage, so that you can run the process and then designate someone.
Annegret, if I may add a point, Since Article 22 is a kind of provision that has multiple, let's say, goal and multiple possible utilization, we concentrated more on the process to, let's say, collect data and doing the studies, apart from the way single NRAs are using these or for regulation or for playing a role in the state aid measures, also because the regulatory framework is different from country to country. So it's a kind of analysis that we didn't look at it.
Thank you very much, Annegret and Mark.
It's a valid question. So is the system used? So maybe we can explore this in the future or for which purposes? Yeah, because Marco is right. The problem is you can use Article 22 for a lot of different purposes.
Thank you. I believe this answers the question. Any more questions? I see no questions in the chat. If not, you can also ask questions when we finish this official part of a public debriefing. Next slide, please, and the last slide. So this is the Let's Stay in Touch call. But just to remind you that the next opportunity will be the 4th public debriefing on 11th of December this year. And of course, stakeholder forum. Save the date. It's easy to remember. It's the 1st of April next year. And with that, we are done for today. Thank you very much for coming.